to thank all of you for joining us today for this emergency briefing. We know that history is accelerating very quickly, and this has implications on all of us, and no matter what country we're in, but certainly in Europe, in the continent. And if there was ever a time where the importance of ELNET should be apparent to all of us, now is the time. Europe now is becoming more aware of its geostrategic concerns and the direct implications of this conflict on the global order and certainly on Middle East security, European security, will be with us for many years to come. The most dangerous time is when new orders are established where the rules are unclear, and this is the period that we're in. So having a network like ELNET that can connect Europe with Israel and with the changing Middle East and the changing global security situation is critical. So we thank all of you for your support and urge you to continue working with ELNET as we look forward in terms of securing Israel and securing its place and its relationship with Europe. We could think of no better speaker today who can analyze the situation than Amos Yadlin. General Yadlin is the chair of ELNET's Forum of Security Dialogue and a strategic analyst of ELNET today among his other pursuits. You know that Amos was served in the Middle East, in the IDF for over 40 years in various capacities, including as head of IDF military intelligence. He also spent over a decade as the head of INSS, the most important think tank in Israel on foreign affairs and security policy. He's currently a senior fellow at the Belfer Center at Harvard University, where he is speaking to us today. Amos, the floor is yours to discuss the developments in the war and the implications on Europe, Middle East, and the world order. Thank you.
Yeah, we will start from the beginning, how it started, why we have a war in Europe, and then we will try to do what is dangerous, looking into the future. The war in Europe is the most serious, horrific, devastating war that Europe saw since World War II. And it's the first time, I think, since maybe 1962 or 1973, that the world is marching towards a danger of a nuclear war. And these two issues are very, very serious. And these two issues were initiated basically by one man, which is Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. What is Putin's strategic goals? First, he wants to change the world order that was created after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the Soviet Union lost the Cold War, and we basically got a world with one superpower, the United States of America. Some called it the end of history. The American values of democracy, of free market, human rights, women's rights, free press, were around the globe as the compass of international order. Two superpowers are unhappy with this international order, and they want to change it. In the last years, everybody was paying attention to China, but China is very cautious. China is using usually its soft power. And here we saw a leader that took his hard power in a way that haven't surprised the American intelligence, but strategically it was a surprise. Tactically, the American intelligence knew exactly what Putin is going to do, to invade Ukraine. The days before the invention, the whole world spoke about Russia and Ukraine war. The only two countries that denied that there's going to be a war were Russia and Ukraine. But the American intelligence have said it right. Putin went into Ukraine. The second goal of Putin, strategic goal, besides changing the world order, is changing the defense order in Europe. Because NATO moved eastward and expand toward Russia, he saw it as a threat to Russia, and he wants to make sure that Ukraine will not join NATO, and some forces that are stationed now in NATO countries, like Poland, Romania, Hungary, will be withdrawn to the line of 1989 before the Soviet Union collapsed. Last but not least, it's Ukraine itself. Putin wants Ukraine to be under his sphere of influence, very much like Belarus. And the fact that Ukraine is shifting towards the West, not only NATO, the EU, and the fact that a Ukraine identity of nationality developed in the last 15 years, but even before, and he saw that he is losing Ukraine, and this for him was like losing the heart of Russia. He wrote 5,000 words, document, which explain why Ukraine is an artificial state, and it is where the kernel of the Ukraine, of the Russian statehood was started, and basically he wants Ukraine to go back to be part of Russia. Why now? Putin felt that America is weak. He looked at Biden as a weak president. He saw the withdrawal, the humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan. He thought that Europe is less united when Merkel is gone. And he thought that his military trained in Syria, proved himself as an efficient military, price of oil going up. He thought that sanctions, he is sanction proved since he coped with sanctions from 2015. And most important, he thought that for the first time, unlike Georgia in 2008, unlike the Crimea annexation in 2015, the Chinese are with him. He got a green light from Xi to go forward. So this is explain why he moved in and basically haven't listened to Schultz or to Macron or to anybody that tried to stop it. So this is the beginning. What is happening as we speak? Putin has three surprises. The first, the underperforming of his military. He thought that after 10 days, today, his forces will be in Kiev. Zelensky will not be there, will maybe killed or run away like the Afghan president. And he will have his puppet government basically taking Ukraine to his sphere of influence. So militarily, his military haven't delivered. So big surprise for Putin. Second surprise, the unity in Europe, the fact that in spite of the different interests in Europe, Germany with all the dependence on Russian energy, and the UK that just departed from Europe, all of them united in an impressive way. In a sense, Putin gave NATO again the sense of mission. And Europe was united against Russia in a way that surprised Putin. Last but not least, sanction. He thought that his sanction proved, but the devastating sanctions that were imposed on Russia and Russian leaders and Russia oligarchs, and Russia economy is much more than he thought. After saying that he was surprised in three areas, I don't see that it affects his behavior. I don't see. He continued with the military attack. And here we must pay attention to a different way of doing wars when it is a superpower and when it is Russia. This is a very tough people. You only have to go back to 1942 to 1945. They drove the Germans from the gates of Moscow to the Berlin bunker, and this took 3 years. So we are not speaking about 6-day war or a war that is numbered in days. It's weeks, months, and who knows, maybe years. So they fail in the first attack, but they will try another one. And they have changed the tactics. Instead of a very clean, surgical way of fighting, because this is not the Muslims in Chechnya. It's not the jihadists in Syria, where you basically destroy the whole city, including schools and markets and hospitals. They try to be clean. It's their brothers, the Slavic brothers. The same, they are Christians. They go to the same church. And they want Ukraine to be part of Russia, so why destroy? But after the first failure, they are now much more aggressive. And you can see the consequences in the cities of Ukraine, and this haven't started yet. There will be a siege, there will be a destroying of quarters where there is Ukrainian resistance, and Putin haven't changed his demands. So this is unfortunately what we see now. The most interesting figure in this whole war is Putin. Nobody knew whether he will start it. We saw all the forces around Ukraine, but he said this is only an exercise. And the answer was between his 2 ears. And this is, again, a source of concern. 22 years in power is a lot, is a lot. Believe me, most of you are Americans, your system is better. 8 years, even the best president, you salute him, you say thank you, you build a library in his hometown, and then go. Here is 22 years, and basically, when he looked backward, he thinks that he was successful. He took Russia from the humiliating time of Yeltsin. He rebuilt the Russian power, the Russian military, the Russian influence, and he had successful wars in Chechnya, in Syria, in Ukraine. So 22 years can change your judgment and your sense of being cautious. And if you add on that the isolation that he, in the last 2 years of COVID, you saw the long table. He sits far away from everybody, even when he consults his own people. I was impressed badly by the National Security Council meeting that they published, they broadcast, the way he behaved or reacts to his chief of intelligence. And he humiliated, telling me that people are not telling him the truth. This is very, very dangerous. Very dangerous. I want to go to, since you are getting all the information from CNN and Fox, I want to go towards the future and try to see where this war is developing into. And I wrote to myself 5 scenario or 5 end games or 5 results of this war. And each one of them is still relevant and has likelihoods. The first one is that after all, with all, I call the first one Iron Curtain 1945. This is the first one. The Russians, in spite of the very brave fight of the Ukrainians, have a power of superpower. They bring new forces, they bring new air force, much more aggressive tactics, and they are winning the war. They are winning the war. It's not within 10 days, it may take 2 months. NATO is not intervening. By the way, from the very beginning, they gave Putin in his risk assessment that this is not a risk to him. So Ukraine is occupied by Russia, and basically Putin won, and the Iron Curtain is again on the western part of Ukraine. This is a reasonable, still a reasonable result of this war. It will be costly. We'll see cities under siege. We'll see cities that will be destroyed. Zelensky will be killed or will decide to leave. But this is a Russian victory. Second, I called it, this is the Iraqi endgame. Yes, the Russians are winning, as the Americans won 2003 against Saddam Hussein. By the way, it took them not days, weeks to go to Baghdad. So superpowers are not going to war for days. They go for a much longer time. But in this case, the Ukrainians continue to fight. Insurgency, guerrilla, partisan, whatever you call it. Ukraine is a huge country, 600,000 square kilometers, bigger than France, and a lot of forests, and you can really have both in the forests and in the cities a resistance. And if they get good weapons from NATO, they can fight for a long year. And here Russia is bleeding, both blood and budget and resources, and this can go not for months, this can go years. In Iraq, it took 7 years until the Americans said enough is enough. So this is a second possibility. Then there is the third outcome, which I called Egyptian-Israeli outcome, which means at the end you reach an agreement that you don't want to reach in the first place, before the war. Because there was, in 1972, some people who tried to negotiate a deal between Israel and Egypt. Both of them never found the zone of agreement. They were far away. They reached this zone of agreement after a very, very difficult war for both sides. So let's assume that the war in Ukraine is taking a high toll from the Russians, as we saw in the first 10 days, and they are not succeeding so much as in the 2 previous scenarios. And assuming that Zelensky see his country destroyed, and he said also that he's willing to compromise. At that moment, as they are sitting in Belarus, in a town called Gomel, they are far away. They cannot agree with anything. The Russians basically asking things that Zelensky cannot accept. And Zelensky asked the Russians to do things that they will not accept. I wonder whether in 2 weeks or a month after they will have some stalemate, a military stalemate, and a lot of blood will be shed, that they will be ripe to reach an agreement that today seems impossible. So this is the third. At the end, they decide on some compromise. And the tragedy is that this compromise could have been before the war. Like Ukraine is not joining NATO, Russia gets some recognition in their rights in Crimea and autonomy to the Donbass. And the Americans are saying we will not withdraw, we will not deploy missiles in Poland that endanger Russia. This is basically the line of an agreement that can be the end of the war if the two sides will understand that continuing the war is much more problematic for them. Scenario number 4, I called it 1989 scenario. Collapse of Russia from the inside, not collapse as a change in Russia in the inside. Because as Putin behaves now, it seems like he doesn't care about the casualties, he doesn't care about the sanctions, and he continue forward. But there are other Russians. At that moment, don't hold your breaths. There are not going to be million Russians in anti-war demonstration. And his people are still, I think, afraid of him. But if the war will continue to drag Russia back economically and on their international prestige, and diplomatically they will be left with 5 countries in the world, North Korea and Eritrea, then I think there may be a change in Russia. We don't have the tools to judge how we are close to this, but it's a possibility. Low likelihood as we speak, but we have to first to hope that this will be the case, and then to look whether something is developing there. And now I'm moving to the most dangerous one, because the war, with all its horrifying results and consequences, is now between Russia and Ukraine. If the war will continue and expand to be NATO-Russian war, then we are in a much higher degree close to World War III, or I can smell Hiroshima there. This is very dangerous. And this is why the Americans from the first place said, we are not going to intervene. We don't want war with Russia. We don't want war to be nuclear. But sometimes you don't want war, but the other side impose it on you. And I can see at least 3 scenarios that maybe 4 that will lead to such a clash. It can be the weapons that NATO countries are bringing to Ukraine. The Russians may say each airplanes that bring supply to Russia will be intercepted, and then it's a war. It can be the airplanes that Poland and Romania promised the Ukrainian. I will not be surprised if the Russians that yesterday destroyed airfields in Ukraine will destroy airfields in Poland. There is a pressure for no-fly zone in the American public, in the European public. Until now, the leaders of the West, of NATO, are saying, no, this is a war with Russia. But if we will see civilians in masses, in millions that are killed from the air, this can happen. And last but not least, it can be Putin, that if he will be successful in Ukraine, he may go to the Baltic countries. Say, okay, I want really to make Russia great again in the borders of the Soviet Union. The nuclear threat was there from the first minute, and this is dangerous. He moved his nuclear forces to readiness, and when sanctions were really biting and painful, he said, this is declaration of war. And remember, when you have such a total war, it is not tit for tat. It is not you attack with airplane, you respond with airplane. You attack with tanks, you respond with tanks. You may be attacked with cyber and respond with nuclear. So it's the whole menu is there. And we have to look at this scenario as the most dangerous. The likelihood today, once again, is very low, but it can develop even by accident. The patrol from Poland somehow crossed the border and found Russian forces, and there was an incident. So I think both sides should be very careful, but as I said, I'm not sure that the leader on the other side is totally playing according to the rules that responsible leaders behave, even evil leaders like like Stalin and Brezhnev. But there were rules that everybody pay attention to. In this case, I'm returning to the beginning of my briefing. They want to break the rules, to change the rules. Before we go to Q&A, I want to speak a little bit about Israel. Israel was in a difficult position because we do have good relation with all the players. Russia, Ukraine, Europe, the United States of America. The Israeli government tried not to identify with any side, which I think was a big mistake, We should not hesitate when it's come to such a aggressive war against democratic elected country, democratic elected Jewish president that is accused to be neo-Nazi. We have our values, and in this case, I think that our values are not in tension with our interests. Our interest is to keep Israel aligned with the free world, with the democratic world, with the West, with our strong and biggest ally, and sometimes only, which is the United States of America. I wrote about it, I spoke about it, but the government gave more weight to the interest that has to do with Russia, which are the nuclear agreement, the activities of Russia in the northern border in Syria, and to keep an open path for Jews to make Aliyah to Israel if Russia will be a place that people don't want to live in. I thought that this is, with all due respect to these interests, they are secondary to the main Israeli need to be in the right side of history, if history has a right side, on the right side of those who helping Ukraine and denouncing in all possible, every possible language what the Russians are doing. Bennett decided to go to Moscow. I'm not against it. If he can stop the war, God bless him. Every day people are killed. Every day it can develop to a very dangerous scenario as I described. I'm not sure he's the one who can broker a ceasefire or an agreement, but the fact that he was asked by the German chancellor to do it, he was asked by other leaders, and I only can quote Nathan Sharansky, who said, "See what happened in Europe 70 years ago. Jews cannot go anywhere. We were on the borders. Nobody want us. We end up refugees, or refugees was the good case. Most of our people end up in Auschwitz. So here is a 70 years past, and the Israeli Prime Minister is asked by everybody to come to Moscow, to come to Berlin. It's not a bad development. I don't think that he will, as I said, the sides are not ripe for an agreement. And he discussed some bilateral issues with the Russians, especially Syria. On the nuclear issue, there is a development that surprised everybody. Suddenly, the Russians are the obstacle because they figure out that America is so eager to go back to the deal. So they try to get a concession on the sanctions and say, since we are the target of Iranian nuclear materials that the deal called for removing from Iran, we want exemption for all the sanctions vis-a-vis Iran. This is interesting. Sometimes, it's come when you read the Agadah Shel Pesach, God is make the heart of Paro stiffer, which enable Moses to have more strike on Egypt. So in this case, maybe Almighty is dealing with the heart of Putin or Lavrov, and this deal that Israel very much thinks that is a bad deal will not happen. If you ask me as an analyst, it will not change anything. The deal will be signed. The two sides want very much. At the maximum, they will remove Russia from being the place that the Iranian uranium will go to. It will go to Germany, to France. They will find a substitution. I'm stopping here. David, take the lead on questions, and I will try to help as much as I can.
Yeah, Amos, thank you very much for that. I just want to remind everyone that this briefing is not for attribution. It's off the record. Some of what Amos has said has already been shared in the press, but certainly in the Q&A as we go deeper into the issues, we're asking that this remain off the record. So please respect that so that Amos can feel comfortable talking to us more in depth. Amos, I did want to ask you about the nuclear deal and the implications for Israel. How far is Iran now as far as we understand it? And what is Israel's strategic situation as a result of this conflict in your eyes? Is the West seen as weaker? Is the United States seen as weaker? Is the axis of resistance in the Middle East bolder, more aggressive, both vis-a-vis Israel and other countries in the Gulf? So where do you see Israel's strategic situation right now as a result of this? Thank you.
Okay, you ask 3 questions, and each one of them is a seminar. But let me take them one by one. The nuclear deal. The nuclear deal in 2015 was mixed. The Prime Minister of Israel said that this is a bad deal, almost Munich kind of deal, new Holocaust. And the President of the United States, not him, but his administration, look at it as the best non-proliferation deal ever reached, who deserve a Nobel Prize for Peace, second Nobel Prize for Peace for the President, even though nobody knew why he got the first one. I, at that time, as head of INSS, said that the deal is acceptable in the first years, because it's removed Iran from being very close to the threshold, a month from the threshold, to a year from the threshold. And if Iran will keep the deal, they are there for 10 years. We have to worry about the sunset. Netanyahu was right about the sunset. The sunset here are unacceptable. Bring Iran back to the threshold and give them legitimacy for unlimited nuclear program. Not nuclear bomb, by the way, but nuclear program. If they decide to go to the bomb, nobody can stop them. But then they violate the NPT commitments and the deal. So what happened after 2018 when Trump withdrew from the deal? The Iranians, after a year of waiting, they also abrogated the deal and they moved forward, and they are now not a year from the bomb. They are now very close to the threshold with advanced centrifuges that they have developed. So even if we go back to the deal, they will not be a year from the bomb. They will be 2 or 3 months from the bomb. So the deal is less effective, and the deal is now in the second half of it, which is much more dangerous. So that's why in 2015, I was not totally against the deal. I thought that we have to prepare ourselves to the bad years. Now I think the deal is unacceptable for Israel. And this is the formal position of the Prime Minister. In this respect, very much like his predecessor. He is against the deal, and Israel is not part of the deal. There is different voices in Israel, by the way. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak is saying, we already lost. The Iranians are in the threshold. Nobody can stop them, no Israel, neither the US. And we have to shift our attention and the resources how to cope with nuclear Iran that already has the bomb. Thanks God is not in the government, and this is not my opinion. I think we haven't lost this campaign against nuclear Iran. I can hear some music of other school of thought in Israel, which basically say, you know, if they want to go back to the deal, let them go back to the deal. We need the time. We need a year or two to prepare and update the military options that Netanyahu neglected, because there was no budget to Israel in the last 3 years. And Netanyahu spoke highly against the deal, but did nothing. So we need to do something. I can hear it at the music in more in the defense quarters, because they have to go forward if there is no deal and Iran continue to go forward. Now, another thing that important to know. When we speak about how close Iran to the bomb, we usually spoke about the fossil material track. When they will have sufficient quantity for the first bomb, for the second bomb, for the fifth bomb, but the material itself, the enriched uranium. Now, what Bennett is saying, this is only one. There is the weaponization. And this gives us more time. So Americans don't push us by saying that the Iranians are already there. We have 2 years that they need for weaponization. In the past, the weaponization was something that considers that you cannot stop. What Bennett is saying, remember, somebody have a very good intelligence. They brought the archive from Tehran. Fakhrizadeh, the leading figure on the nuclear program in Iran, was assassinated. Those who knew how to do that will find the weaponization group and will be able to stop them if needed. So whenever somebody talks to you about how far Iran from the bomb, you have to ask them, are you talking about the fissile material, the enriched uranium track, or you're talking about weaponization? Look what happened. When I was chief of intelligence, we used to say that weaponization is a piece of cake, can be done in 3 months. Our friends from America say, oh, 2 years at least, because they didn't want to be under pressure. Today, the Americans are saying 3 months because they want to go back to the deal to stop it. And the Israelis are saying 2 years. Hey, so sometimes engineering assessment is up to your political consideration. On fissile material, you cannot do this manipulation. On weaponization, yes. Now we move from Iran nuclear to Iran regional. No doubt that the Iranians are now feeling much better than they felt in the last year of President Trump. In the last year of President Trump, after Qasem Soleimani, they were very cautious, very cautious. They were afraid that in the last year, the last months, Trump may knock down their nuclear program, and they keep their forces, their proxies, under a very tight control. Since January 2021, they are firing missiles, cruise missiles, UAVs, all over the Middle East. Saudi Arabia almost every week. Abu Dhabi in January was the first time that they attacked Abu Dhabi. And today, as we speak, the Israelis are now sharing with the media the fact that they try to send UAV also to Israel. They were intercepted. But this is how Iran is now behaving in the Middle East. The Saudis should be very worried because they are vulnerable. Abu Dhabi should be very worried. Think about Manhattan, hit by missiles every week. Israel is a strong country, and we can do much better than the Saudis and the UAE. We have a better intelligence. We have a better early warning system, radars. We can preempt if we know where they come from. And we have good interception and the best missile defense in the world. I'm not promising you that none of the Iranian UAV will ever not penetrate Israel. But at the end of the day, it's like a rocket from Gaza. I'm not taking it, it's not a strategic threat, and Israel can cope with it. I still give priority to the nuclear issue over the other Iranian behavior in the Middle East, which is basically more against Saudi Arabia, UAE, in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon. The Iranians are not 10 feet high. And when they have to fight far away from their country, we are giving them a tough fight.